Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Robert Jensen. He is an author and a professor of journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. Hi, Bob.
Hello, Sonali.
The U.S. and Turkey have reached a deal in the fight against Islamic State militants that involves a secure zone between the Turkey-Syria border. The agreement also allows the U.S. to use Turkish air bases from which to launch attacks. The Wall Street Journal, which reported the deal, speculated that the U.S. could send a quiet warning to the Assad regime to stay away from the zone or to risk retaliation. Just days earlier, the Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Muallim criticized the U.S. campaign against ISIS, saying it had not worked, primarily because Turkey's border with Syria was insecure. The U.S. is playing a complicated game, attempting to defeat one faction of the broad opposition facing the Syrian regime while maintaining hostility against President Bashar al-Assad. For its part, Turkey, which Syria accuses of harboring militants, has been reluctant to join the U.S.-led fight until now. Well, Bob, the war started out as a delicate balance between this complicated set of allegiances, but it doesn't look like much has changed now, has it? Can you hear me, Bob?
I'm sorry, there's some technical difficulties. You're back now. We're in the struggle around Syria. The idea that it's a game is, of course, accurate, although whenever there are human lives on the line, it seems flippant to call it a game. But we see here each actor, Turkey, the United States, Syria, Iran, they all have their own interests, and they're all playing this complicated game. Turkey, for instance, trying to claim a sort of superiority in the Sunni world, yet in conflict with a lot of the Arab states. The United States still not able to sort out its own role in this. I sort of, again, don't want to be flippant, but think back to days when analyzing the Middle East seemed easier than today, when there are so many of these intersecting and conflicting goals. Whatever it bodes for, it doesn't bode well for the Syrian people.
And then a mass movement in Hong Kong for greater autonomy from China started out months ago as peaceful and even overly polite, but has now seemingly grown tired of waiting for change. In the wake of inaction from Hong Kong's own leaders and China's silence, student activists this morning encircled government buildings, clashing with police. According to Reuters, the demonstrators defended themselves with, quote, wooden shields and metal barricades as they charged police forces chanting, "Surround the government." The mass movement is seen as one of the biggest threats for China's Communist Party leadership since the Chinese student-led movement for democracy in 1989 that culminated in the Tiananmen Square massacre. Well, Bob, the Occupy-style protests in Hong Kong have been linked to U.S. interference because some groups have apparently received funding from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a U.S. agency, a government agency. How independent and sincere do you think this movement in Hong Kong is?
Well, here we want to remember, of course, the United States has a long history of intervening in the internal affairs of other governments. So the United States' hands have never been clean in these matters. But let's remember that most of that intervention, whether it was overt or covert, tended to be aimed at weak states that we could control in certain ways. China is not a weak state. So the idea that through the National Endowment for Democracy, the United States is somehow masterminding this opposition movement doesn't seem sensible to me. Does the U.S. want to influence such movements? Yes. Its ability to do that, however, it strikes me as extremely limited. So one should never underestimate the possibility for nefarious action on the part of any government, the U.S. included. But this doesn't seem to me to be one of those instances.
And we'll certainly follow the story and see where Hong Kong's movement will wind up. Finally, Switzerland yesterday rejected a major referendum that would have restricted the numbers of immigrants entering their country. Voters were offered an initiative that reflected some concern about the entry of foreign workers. In voting it down, the Swiss government's treaties with the European Union remain intact. as the EU requires free movement of labor within its member states. Now, according to Al Jazeera, quote, almost a quarter of the 8 million people living in Switzerland are foreigners, a statistic that is partly due to Switzerland's healthy economy and high salaries. The vote comes just days after UK Prime Minister David Cameron announced a harsh set of anti-immigrant policies, including cutting off government benefits to non-UK citizens. The UK will have to re-evaluate its EU membership if Cameron's Conservative Party is re-elected and enacts such measures. Now, Bob, what explains the difference between the UK and Switzerland on this issue, and could the UK break away from the EU over immigration?
Well, remember, the UK has always been an outlier in Europe. It never joined the Eurozone. It didn't accept the common currency. The particular tenor of British politics is always creates edge, even to some degree when there was a Labour government. But of course, the Conservative government, even more so. Remember also, British politics is changing. The rise of right-wing parties, Independence Party that is anti-immigrant, is certainly putting pressure on the Conservatives, who are in a weak position. So I think this is mostly about the peculiar internal dynamics of British politics. But at a bigger level, it also reminds us of the hypocrisy of this whole world system, where capital and the corporations that control capital are fairly mobile across national boundaries, but people are not. And this is a problem we're going to have to come to terms with, not only in Europe, but worldwide, where the disparities in wealth worldwide are going to take this form. And I think the tension around it is only going to grow over the coming years.
Bob Jensen, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Sonali.
Robert Jensen is an author and a professor of journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.